Hey guys, if you're shopping for knives and gear, make sure you check out the description of the video you're watching right now for links to some great online retailers. There's also individual links for knives that I personally recommend. Thanks!
What's going on YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got a really cool knife overview to share with you guys. This is the St. Nick's exclusive Spyderco Shaman in red G10 and CPM 4V steel. Before we get started, this was an exclusive version of the Shaman that is no longer available unless you want to go on the secondary market and pay way too much money for it. Don't do that. For those of you like, how are people getting their hands on these weird versions of these Spyderco knives? They're so cool, and every time I check, they're gone, right? Basically, you just have to be aware of it before it drops. A good way to go about this is to follow different retailers on Instagram or sign up for email notifications on their website. Fortunately for you guys, I've got affiliate programs set up with some different retailers who do their own exclusive versions of Spyderco knives, lots of different ones. DLT Trading and Blade HQ, for example, do lots of different Spyderco sprints, different Spyderco exclusives, and Blade HQ actually has their own version of the Shaman, right? Now they're different colors, different blade steels, right? But if you guys are wanting to get your hands on stuff like that, you can use my links and go down and sign up for email notifications through those retailers. I don't know this for a fact, but I'm assuming at some point DLT will do a red G10 and 20CV version, and I know Blade HQ's got a new version of the Shaman coming out, and Micarta, and what is it, Z-Wear, something like that. There's always going to be different ones, right? So if you find yourself late to the game on stuff like this, simply waiting to hear about it and then going and checking at the retailer will probably not result in you getting what it is that you want. You just have to be ready to go before they drop, because stuff like this literally sells out in minutes. And if you want to get a decent deal on it, you just kind of have to be ready to go. But I still like to do overviews of interesting sprints on this channel. I upload so much content, right? 2 uploads a day, that's 14 uploads a week. I've got room to show knives that I've already talked about before, just with interesting variants. Now, I own the Shaman, a lot of you guys know. One of my favorite knives ever is it's a standard Spyderco Shaman that I've actually outfitted with titanium scales. I love this, and actually, you know, as soon as a certain sprint comes along where I really like the steel and the finish, I will actually replace my old Shaman blade with a sprint version of it. Yeah, for anybody who doesn't know, the Spyderco Shaman, I consider it to be one of the very best folding knives that has ever existed. I love this knife. So of course, sprint runs and odd variants of it that are not super plentiful compared to like the Spyderco PM2 or Para 3. We see a lot of sprints with those Manix 2 sprints, right? We haven't seen as many sprints and exclusives with the Shaman, and I'm sure that day is coming where we're going to see a lot more. So just making people aware that stuff like this is out there and that more will become available. Yeah, that's kind of why I'm doing this, but also just because how often do we see a knife in CPM 4V? We just don't see that very often. We're going to talk all about that. Thanks so much to Kyle Roberts 610 for sending this guy in for me to take a look at. Please give him a follow on Instagram. It's because of people like him that I'm able to bring you guys daily knife content. It's also because of my generous patrons. Thanks so much for supporting me right now. If you guys are enjoying the daily knife content on this channel and you'd like to support me and get your hands on some cool stickers, there's of course a link for my Patreon right down in the description. You're supporting me in the world to me. And please follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. I have already done a full comprehensive review on the Shaman, and I've talked about it a billion times. You can find that in my Spyderco Knives playlist, as well as many discussion topics that are featuring the Shaman. You can check out top 10 lists where the Shaman is seemingly always present, right? Lots of other stuff. So this isn't really a review. This is an overview. We're just going to take a look at this. I'm going to give you guys my thoughts, in terms of 4V and whether or not I think it's appropriate for the Shaman, and we're just going to take a look at this. So I'll do some quick measurements just for people who don't know and are stumbling across this and have never seen the Shaman before. Overall length of the Spyderco Shaman is coming in at 8¼ inches overall. Blade length is coming in just a little bit longer than 3.5, about 3.6 inches overall. And your cutting edge is coming in at about 3 1/8 thanks to a very large forward choil. We're looking at G10. On the inside, we do have countersunk steel liners. Blade stock thickness on this guy is about 145 thousandths, so somewhat thick, right? This is a somewhat heavy knife. This is right in my preferred weight range for carry. I live in Kansas. I can legally carry this knife, and I generally wear jeans, so I like a full-size knife that's just what I like. I think this is going to come in at like, what are they, 5 1/4, 5 1/2, something like that. Not quite 5 1/4, 5.15 ounces. That's obviously going to be too heavy for some people, too big. For me, it's just fine. I like a robust knife. I like a knife that's got some weight to it. The balance on this guy is pretty darn good. I think the balance is literally right underneath, slightly behind the pivot, something like right here. This is about the balance point on it. Back here feels pretty good. Feels a lot better up here. For anybody who doesn't know, the standard position of the pocket clip is okay in my book. I actually opted for a deep carry clip through MXG, which I think is a lot better. It basically just pretends the lanyard hole isn't there, which is fine because on these Flytanium scales, I opted for them not to mill the lanyard hole because I don't care about it. But it's present on the standard Spyderco Shaman. And honestly, the standard black clip on this guy looks really good. I'm going to go ahead and say this. Of all the Shamans that are out there, which there are not a lot, right? The standard version, I'm going to link the Shaman in general, right? For people who just want to pick up a Shaman as, you know, just so you guys know, the Shaman is one of the most consistently recommendable knives on this channel, despite its price having gone up, right? It's at the point where it's like, they want $202 for the standard Spyderco Shaman. That's a lot of money, but it's one of my favorite knives ever. I highly recommend it. You can absolutely pick up the standard S30V Shaman with black G10 right now, or you can get it in tumbled or a black DLC finish. I will link the standard Shaman right down below and Spyderco knives in general so you guys can check that out. It's a very, very good knife. In terms of all the different Shamans that are out there, right, they have the orange G10 and Rex 45. They've got the M4 Shaman in jade. They've got the S90V in carbon fiber. They've got the wood one in Rex 45. I think they've got some other weird, maybe a couple of other ones out there, right? There's a few different versions that have been floating around that were either sprints or an exclusive through a certain retailer, right? This is probably the best looking one. I really like red and black. I think that looks great. I think it translates really well to the Shaman. I don't know that it's going to be for everybody, but I'm partial to red G10. I think it looks nice. This is great. Obviously, we still have the beautiful, heavily chamfered edges and then the flat up here. This looks like it might be peel ply. It is not. It is very, very smooth. I love the black hardware. I love the black clip, right? This is DLC, not tumbled. Spyderco's DLC is tungsten based. It is very hard. I want to say something like 80, 81 Rockwell on the DLC here. What is CPM 4V? Is it like CPM 3V? What is CPM 3V? CPM 3V, first off, for anybody who doesn't know, CPM stands for Crucible Particle Metallurgy, or Crucible Powder Metallurgy. I can't remember which one. In any case, essentially, the cake mix of the steel, right? It's powderized, and that way they get even distribution in terms of the makeup, right? So you get exactly the results you want, and they're consistent across the entirety of the blade. So CPM 3V is a steel that is not stainless and is extremely tough and has decent edge retention. That's great for people who are really, really going to beat on their knives really hard, and they don't want the the edge chipping away, making it really difficult to, sharpen consistently. Or, well, I mean, not that you can't sharpen knives that are more chipped. Like, let's compare, for example, CPM S110V. That steel is stainless and has a very high Rockwell, and the composition combined with that Rockwell hardness and an optimal heat treat results in an edge that is extremely has extremely high edge retention, right? But it's more likely to chip because it's not very tough. It's so hard, and the composition does not yield toughness, right? So it depends on what you're going to use it for. For some people, that's going to be great. But if you're really going to be going out and beating on your knife, S110V, in my experience, is not a great steel to do that with. So on the opposite end of the spectrum, and there's a lot of steels out there. 3V is, alongside many other steels that will, sort of fill that void that I'm talking about. Not stainless at all, and we're still talking about 3V. We're going to talk about 4V here in a sec. Not stainless at all, extremely tough and decent edge retention. And this is great, especially for people like me who live out in Kansas. I've found that I really don't need to worry too much about corrosion resistance. Here's my Maximate Para 3 that I've been using consistently for about a year. Not stainless at all, and this one isn't even coated. Barely any hint of a patina forming on this guy. Corrosion resistance is really not that much of a problem. Obviously, if you expose it to moisture, you're going to want to wipe it off. Non-stainless steels, you're definitely going to want to wipe it off. Now, Maximate has incredibly high edge retention and decent toughness, nowhere near the same level of toughness as 3V. But the stainless coil is about the same, but that's where they differ there. It's much less tough in terms of toughness, right? This versus 3V, much higher edge retention. 4V is better edge retention than CPM 3V, not quite as tough, right? Still going to be tougher than steels like CPM M4. This is an interesting area. Obviously, you know, this area, it gets kind of foggy in terms of like exactly who needs exactly this composition for what they're doing it for. I mean, I don't know. I think it's interesting that we have a boost in edge retention over 3V, not quite the same edge retention as M4, and less toughness than 3V, but more toughness than, you know, a steel like M4. I think that's interesting. I think the most interesting part about all this is that, and by the way, I'm not a professional metallurgist, right? Some of what I'm saying might be kind of true, and I'm being intentionally foggy because I'm not a professional. It's essentially just information that's being relayed after I read about it. I get my information from Knife Steel Nerds and Z Knives, right? But I'm hoping that I'm getting all this correct. If I'm incorrect about any of it, please feel free to correct me down in the comments section. But yeah, I think this is great. I think it's also great that it's coated. A steel like this would be really great for somebody like me who is, you know, periodically taking their knives out and using them pretty. I mean, even if it's little things like just what I do, the heaviest use that my knives see is when I'm doing home projects. If I'm working in my backyard, if I'm doing something on the roof, or if I'm, you know, fixing some part of my fence, or I'm doing some little thing outside where I just want to take a knife out, throw it around, use it for whatever I feel like, and then if I need to sharpen it at the end of the day, not have much of an issue getting an edge back on it, right? That's great. So where I live in Kansas, for what I use my knives for, high toughness is very good. Decent edge retention is also good. I don't need maxed out crazy edge retention like what I get from my Maximate, though I do appreciate it. I don't need the same edge retention that I get from M390 or S110V, right? I don't need that. And I definitely don't need excess corrosion resistance. I just don't need it. I've found that while I do appreciate my M390 knives, my 20CV knives, right, I just don't care about it as much as I thought that I needed to. So how does this translate? How does this steel translate on a knife like the Shaman? Well, the construction of the Shaman is definitely one that I would say is built for more hard use stuff. But the cold steel triad lock is so much stronger, and you can't say hard use if you're not going to include the triad lock. I understand that, but I've made the argument many times. I think the triad lock is very, very strong, but completely and totally overkill. Anything that I would use a knife for, even in excess, a few things outside of the natural tasks that I would use a knife for. Sorry, I'm in the basement, so every time somebody uses the water in this house, everybody gets to hear it. Anything that I would, you know, use this knife for, I think it's going to shrug it off just fine. And I think even some, you know, excess, some more, I don't know, some awkward cuts where you're kind of turning or twisting while you're cutting, maybe a little tiny bit of prying, I think it's going to handle it just fine. If I want to use, if I've got a task that requires hammering, I'll use a hammer. If I've got a task that's going to require heavy prying, I'm going to use a pry bar. If I've got a task that requires me, you know, screwing in a bolt or unscrewing a screw or whatever, I'm going to use a screwdriver. That's what I'm going to use. So I don't need my knife to be all of those things. I need my knife to be a knife, right? Some excess durability is appreciated, and I think that's what you're getting with the Shaman. I found that the ergonomics of the Shaman and the geometry of the blade and, you know, basically how they grind it, which is a fully flat, almost completely and totally flat ground blade, I think it's great. It's extremely versatile. It's very comfortable to use over a long period of time. I think the blade stock thickness is appropriate, and that's, you know, the geometry behind the edge. It's all going to be accentuated by 4V steel, which is, again, a steel that has really good toughness and decent edge retention and is not stainless. From what I hear, 4V is not an issue to strop or resharpen, right? You're more likely to get a roll in the edge than a chip, which is much easier to deal with if you really do have to, if you're going to wear the edge down to the point where it's basically dull, right? If you have way more rolling going on than chipping, that's going to be much easier to deal with, right? If you're going to have to spend 45 minutes getting a nice, clean, sharp edge back on your knife, right? Or, I mean, you can do that in 30 to 45 minutes on this knife versus, in my experience, I'm still a novice sharpener. Much longer, much more difficult to do with a, you know, a steel that's, you know, got a much higher Rockwell hardness and a composition that's, you know, lots of carbide. It's just basically going to make it more resilient to the stones that you're going to use on it, right? So I like that. People who are very well versed in sharpening will say, those harder steels are not that big of a deal. They are going to be for the vast majority of people, considering the vast majority of people are not professional sharpeners and have not had experience sharpening a lot of these different steels. So that's my take on 4V. I think 4V steel translates really, really well. A lot better, in my opinion, than maybe a steel like S90V. When I think of a knife like the Shaman, I think of, robust, hard use, versatile, right? So, when I think of what steels are appropriate on a knife like this, it's steels with excess toughness, or that emphasize toughness for the most part over other elements. Does that mean that any other blade steel on this knife is not appropriate? No, it just depends on who you are and what you're going to use with your knife, right? And where you live. If you live near the ocean, it doesn't matter if you appreciate the qualities of 4V, you're kind of going to be screwed, because this blade, even with a coating, it's going to corrode much faster, right? But I think this translated well. There's not really a lot to say here. I mean, the other good things, of course, about the Shaman is that it's using T8 hardware. I like the backspacer, even though I've never really understood why it doesn't come flush with the top. That's not really that big of a deal, right? A lot of people are going to say, you got to talk about how annoying that nub is when the nub comes around and it touches your finger. Oh, it touches my finger. I told people, when I started making fun of that. For anybody who doesn't know, a long time ago when the Shaman first released, there were a few people saying, well, there's a design flaw, because when you go to whip this thing closed, you can feel that nub touching your finger in the exact position where you were depressing the compression lock. For the longest time, I actually forgot that people actually complained about that, because I purchased the Shaman, and after about 14 seconds, I adapted to basically how the compression lock works with this guy in relationship with the blade, and now it's second nature to simply move my finger out of the way. I mean that. 14 seconds at maximum. Basically 3 or 4 times deploying it and whipping it closed. I have no idea why people complain about that. It's not even something that registers. And then it got brought back up in another video, and I'm not trying to brag here, but thousands and thousands and thousands of comments on videos related to the Spyderco Shaman, and after a year and a half, I finally got one person going, that really is kind of a flaw. It just, from my perspectives, being somebody who uploads a lot of content about knives on YouTube and talks a lot about the Spyderco Shaman, I can tell you that it's kind of proof that it really just isn't a big deal. It's not something to worry about. So I always joke about, the nub coming around. If you're worried about that, don't be. I will continue to aggressively wave off that that complaint, because I just don't think it's a problem. It's nowhere near reason enough to avoid this knife if you're considering purchasing it. I think the vast majority of people, if they do decide to pick up a Shaman, will be very, very happy with it. I think this is the Shaman in general is one of the most sought after knives in terms of like sprint runs and dealer exclusives. And I think it's the most, and from my perspective, it's the most interesting knife that there will be additional sprints and exclusives of. These are always insanely popular, and it doesn't take much to find that the general consensus on the Shaman is that it is an excellent, excellent knife. It's just expensive, right? These are made in the United States. When they first released, the original Shaman was $155, and then they bumped it to $185, and now it's at $205, which blows, but they should have cut it off at $185, right? That's what I paid for mine. I was, but okay, But yeah, these sprints are really, really cool. I'm really interested to see more stuff, more interesting steels. I'd obviously like to see a Spy 27 version of the Shaman. I'd love to see a K390 version of the Shaman. That would be really, really interesting. I know a lot of people would love to see a Maximate Shaman. I'll tell you right now, that is my #1 most wanted to the version of the Shaman that I most want to exist is a gray G10 and tumbled like the PM2 and Para 3 that they've already done. I'd love to see a Shaman version of that. That would just be excellent. That would be very good for me. But yeah, the 4V1 is really, really cool. I think it's exceptionally interesting because St. Nick's is the only one who's done a 4V version of this. I'm not really sure why we don't see more 4V in the knife world. It's pretty rare to see that, so it just makes it that much more interesting. This has turned into just sort of a discussion and ramble about the Spyderco Shaman in general, which I've done many times, right? So people who are, you know, regular viewers and have been subscribed for a long time will find that there's no real, you know, excess here, other than just being able to look at this really cool version of the St. Nick's 4V Shaman. But yeah, should you go out and spend $300 on the secondary market on this guy? No. You can find a reasonable deal, right? I mean, honestly, you know, if I found somewhere that, you know, somebody was selling one brand new for $240, $250, would I consider it? Yeah, I would. I don't know what these went for brand new, but don't go out and pay $300 for something like this unless this is absolutely just your dream knife and it's the end all be all and the only knife that can make you happy. Then okay, then do what you want. But for everybody else, right? Just wait. More interesting versions of the Spyderco. Not saying more interesting than this, because that depends on who you are and what you look for in a knife, but there will be additional versions of the Spyderco Shaman available in the future in lots of different interesting configurations. I don't work for Spyderco. I don't work for a retailer or anything like that. I'm just speculating, so it's just my opinion, but it seems like that's where we're headed. So, yeah. If you want to check out Blade HQ or DLT or whatever, you know, the retailers I've got listed down below, sign up for email notifications so that you're at least aware. Again, the best ways to be ready to go is to follow Spyderco or your, you know, retailer of choice on Instagram. Be a part of the Spyderco forums, right? There's a lot of chatter, and generally you'll be ready to go way before the drop date, and then make sure that you're ready when the time comes and buy it as quickly as possible, because a lot of times these types of sprints and exclusives sell out in minutes. I've seen, you know, 3 minutes to sell out on a particular type of knife. I know some people get bent out of shape about the whole, you know, limited supply of sprints and exclusives thing. Yeah, I wish that there were enough of these to be available for everybody. That sure would be great. It would be awesome if Spyderco had a custom builder, kind of like what Benchmade does, where you can get various different steels and different, you know, colors of G10. You can kind of build, you know, the knife that you want. I don't know if that day is coming or if it'll ever come. I don't know. You know, different retailers and businesses like Spyderco operates in their own way, and the retailers, I'm sure, really like to get a lot of traffic all at once to their site. So there's lots of different reasons for this. I can understand, you know, people being upset about it and it being justified on, you know, I can understand both sides of the fence. It is what it is. I like bringing you guys the content and letting you guys watch and look at stuff, right? So anyways, that's really all this was meant to be. Thanks again, Kyle Roberts, for sending this guy along. Be sure to follow him on Instagram. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. Like I said, Spyderco Shaman listed down below, along with Spyderco knives in general, so you guys can check that stuff out. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that Metal Complex logo right there and subscribe, because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.